So, I'm hoping today's sermon will help you think about courage and vulnerability in several contexts. First, just in your own heart. And secondly, when someone is needing something from you or you need something from someone. And third, what courage and vulnerability look like in our work for equity and justice. So, why do we care about the relationship between courage and vulnerability? Because, and you've heard me say this at least 4 times before, connection is why we're here. When you connect, you belong. Last month, I talked about the mental and physical health liabilities of not belonging, and they are rather dire. For most of us, there are times when we shy away from belonging, and it's our unwillingness to place ourselves at risk that causes us to turn away. It is at the fulcrum of vulnerability and courage that we access our common humanity. And that can be scary. We see the vulnerability in others, and from that, we can lay claim that we are not alone in our worries about vulnerability. As Unitarian Universalists, we are repeatedly faced with the first principle that places our inherent worth and dignity right in front of us, and yet it is so hard for us to claim it and believe it. And we can even believe it for others, but sometimes can't believe it for ourselves. To be excluded or to exclude causes pain, and yet it's hard to risk being vulnerable. But the inescapable truth is, if we don't take the risk, we can't reap the life-saving rewards. Vulnerability and the courage it takes to experience it is the birthplace of love, joy, empathy, innovation, and creativity. So I don't know about you, but that's like everything on my list of things I need. Love, joy, empathy, innovation, and creativity. What we are really talking about when we say courage and vulnerability. What do I mean? The word courage in Latin is from cor, and in the earliest forms it meant to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. But over time, I assume, due to warfare and crusades, other things, it came to mean brave and heroic deeds. But that fails to convey the inner strength and the level of commitment required of us to actually speak honestly and openly about what is on our heart, about our experiences and who we are. So that's really what courage is. To name it, to speak openly about our experiences and what we need. The poet Jean Olson states, "May you be brave enough to expose your aching woundedness and reveal your vulnerability. May you speak your deepest truths, knowing that they will change you as you do." So no courage without vulnerability. Because we are asking for what we need, we're expressing what we need in here at the core. And that might mean a favor, some companionship, or even just sharing our grief in silence. I used to walk with a friend who lost her husband, and she would say, "I don't want to talk at all. I just want to walk in silence." So the poet Jean Olson and many others have explored the connection between courage and vulnerability. But it was social scientist researcher Dr. Brene Brown, and no, I'm not going to preach on her every time. But she studied thousands of people. She has a PhD in social work, and she's a researcher. She's also a speaker. And before 12 years ago, nobody knew who she was. And she did this little TED talk in Houston that went national and it went viral. It has 6 million viewers. So, and she talks about that she had her research team go out and ask people questions. And she was actually kind of looking at the relationship between shame and vulnerability. But she says the favorite question that she asks people, I just asked them to think of the last time that they thought they did something really brave, or the last time someone they knew did something really brave. I can tell you as a researcher, now that I have 11,000 pieces of data, I cannot find a single example of courage, spiritual courage, leadership courage, relational courage. I cannot find a single example of courage that was not born completely of vulnerability. She goes on to say, we buy into some mythology about vulnerability being weakness or gullibility or a frailty because it gives us permission not to do it. So when we are vulnerable, we can then act with courage. These are the most meaningful and meaning-making times in our lives. I believe that as both a minister and a social worker. And I want to echo, Brown also found that vulnerability is the birthplace of love and joy. There are other people who had already identified that, but I think she just proves it with the data. It's also the core of innovation. And I hadn't thought about this, how it shows up in your work, in your vocation, in your volunteer time. I try to set always a tone that we all make mistakes. We will all have some half-baked ideas sometimes. We meant well. We just didn't consider all the possibilities, or maybe we didn't just consider how the impact was going to land on different groups. We had good intentions, but impact can sometimes be hurtful. I will say, in all of my parenting, and I think my family's out there on the live stream this morning, I tried to allow my son to make as many of his own decisions as he could as he grew up. And there were some categories for physical and emotional safety, and there was also what was age appropriate. But I let him make decisions, and I knew he'd make mistakes. I would kind of have him talk through, so you want to do this, and why do you want to do that, and how do you think that might impact how your homework time or your ability to sleep in on a Saturday morning? I'm a firm believer if we don't let children make mistakes when they have a safety net of family and friends around them, they will not have the skills they need when it's time to negotiate the world as young adults. Mistakes at our house were not a place of shame, rather a learning opportunity, even when sometimes those lessons were really, really hard to learn. And then those around can be the cheering section. So you can't have creativity and innovation if you don't risk failure. Which I mean putting out an idea that might not work. I want to encourage you in your volunteer work here at the fellowship. First of all, I just want to encourage you to volunteer, right? We need you. And if you're thinking about volunteering, but like, I don't know, I don't have the skill for that, or that's really going to be a challenge for me, do it anyway, because there are people here who will help you, and they will mentor you. And also know that it's okay to learn. We all bring ideas right now, especially in the interim ministry time. They might be sometimes the wrong conclusions or just conclusions we need to reconsider. Right now, you probably noticed we changed some things about the service. And then we had Aaron recording music, we're just trying a few new things, and we don't know if they're going to work out over time, but we're going to try them for a few months and see how it goes. I know we're going to get feedback, and that's a great thing, because how else do we know? So if we can build a culture here that allows for vulnerability, we might be innovative, we will create, and sometimes it's not going to work out. And I have to say, this morning, there were moments where it really felt chaotic and didn't know if we were going to pull it all together. But I also knew it was going to be okay. It is what it is, and it was going to be okay because we're together in worship. I didn't think that made me a bad minister. I didn't think that made us, what's the word I want? Not competent to put on worship. It was just one of those mornings. So the other thing I want to bring to you from Brene Brown, and again, I think other people have identified this, but she has data, is that shaming oneself puts up a barrier to vulnerability every time. We don't want people to say, oh, you're inept. You're not good enough. What were you thinking? Those words scare us so much because we are so afraid we're going to believe them. In this culture of criticism, it's hard to let things just roll off and say, I tried it, I'll do it differently next time. I also want to talk a little bit about hope. And as you just heard it in the reading, I'm not sure if I agree with that reading or not. And I'm really going to ponder that this week. Does courage come and then hope? Or does hope come and then courage? I'm going to think about that all week. The reading, Mary Heglar said, courage leads to action and hope comes next. I'm not sure how to apply that, but I know that the more we do brave things, the more we increase our faith in our ability to persevere through hard things. So I'm going to play with what she said because I like it. Marginalized groups especially know that vulnerability, courage, and hope are essential to their survival. Their hope is the creation of a vision of how things should be, and living into that vision in whatever ways are possible. And hope is making a commitment to live as if certain things are true, and thereby just making them so. I want to talk about a group in Unitarian Universalism. I was thinking about courage and vulnerability and how they relate to what is going on in our denomination regarding racism. If you read your UU World magazine, which is right around the corner, if you don't get them, there are 3 copies there that you are welcome to take. So in our own denomination, based on feedback from people of color, leadership at the Unitarian Universalist Association said, you know what, we need to be paying more attention to racism. We need to be spending our money on supporting our people of color. So leadership assumed that because of all society contains some element of systemic racism, so not necessarily people carrying it, but it comes in through the systems we already have. So they weren't assuming Unitarian Universalism was immune to that. We're no better, we're no worse than most people out there walking around, most institutions out there functioning. But it was courage and vulnerability of the people of color coming forward to tell their stories. And I have to say, when I started listening to their stories, it provided some shockingly bright illumination on how racist beliefs and practices negatively impact their lives. I was tremendously touched by a professional musician talking about the various ways in which he is minimized in his musical capacity in the community. Reverend Michael Slack talks about the founding of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism that occurred in 2015 at a gathering of Black UUs. He said folks were talking about their experiences and finding commonality. The experiences were disheartening and hard. There were a few that were cruel, and we thought that perhaps we could work together and support Black UUs who were having similar experiences. They eventually founded Black Lives of UU, and I would encourage all of you, if you're not working on the Hope Question this week, I want you to go to bluu.org and see their website, Black Lives of UU. So they support and engage one another. They also do social justice work. They founded a supported a housing initiative in Minneapolis that came up with 30 townhouses for Black families and also Native American families. Michael Slack says, please, Unitarian Universalism, live up to the very best parts of ourselves to be a truly liberatory faith. I'm sorry to tell you there's been some pushback on Michael Slack and others. Denial of their lived experiences. But Blue continues on with courage and strength. Another group demonstrating courage are the First Peoples of our nation. Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, which of course, for some time, white culture has referred to as Columbus Day. But First Nations say, hey, we are still here. We are here with our ceremonies, with our music, with our love of family and community. They claim this time for recognizing and celebrating their culture's contribution as First Peoples. So whether it's just in our hearts, or just in friendships and community here, or in our wider culture, it is only courage that can lead us forward. I will close today with the words of aptly named Unitarian Universalist minister, Leslie Ahuvel Fales, because she is not at all fearful of trying and failing. She says, all that we have been separately, and all that we will be together is stretched out before and behind us like stars scattered across a canvas of the sky. We stand on the precipice, arms locked together like tandem skydivers, working on the courage to jump. Tell me, friends, what have we got to lose? Our fear of failure? Our mistrust of our own talents? What wonders await us in the space between the first leap and the moment our feet or our wheels or however our bodies get around touch down on softly unknown soil? Let us lose our poverty of spirit. Let us lose the lie that we are alone. What have we got to lose that we can't replace with some previously unimaginable joy? Blessed be.